The Midwife Crisis podcast will touch on sensitive topics regarding the human body, sexuality, pregnancy, and all aspects of women's healthcare and may not be suitable for all listeners. Hi, I'm Kate.
And I'm PR, and this is season 2 of the Midwife Crisis, because it's not just you. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Alvin, a current midwifery student and all-around wonderful person. I've seen him at work. Thanks for joining us, Alvin.
Welcome, Alvin. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with us your pronouns and also a little bit about yourself.
Perfect. So I'm Alvin. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to meet both of you. My pronouns are he and him. And what else were you going to ask me?
Just a little bit about yourself. Tell us, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. So I'm Alvin. I'm actually a student nurse midwife and a future women's health nurse practitioner. I came into the work about 6 years ago, and I have been involved in women's health or birth work ever since.
How did you come into the work?
So that is a very long story, but I have, so I'll share it.
Yeah.
But, I used to work in finance. I've worked in finance for a very long time as my first career. And then I decided to transition into something a little bit more aligned with my own worldview and what I'm interested in doing. I also had some family history with my mother who had some health issues. So all combined with all of that, I decided to join or to start to work in women's health as well. And I was a doula for a very long time, a nanny.
Awesome.
So both of those things kind of led me into the birth work or birth world, and also a yoga teacher. So a lot of things led me to this line of work.
Very nice. We have a number of emails that we've received from midwife students around the world, we'll have to say, from Great Britain and Australia, different places. And they're always curious about our journeys into midwifery and how we got into it. And we talked about ours in earlier episodes. I don't know if you got a chance to have a listen or not. But what are the barriers that you see facing student midwives today?
For myself or?
For you?
No, for you.
So a lot of it is, I think, the educational system is very complex, and I think some students have a hard time navigating the educational system in order to be able to even access the master's level requirements in the United States for certified nurse midwives. And also, of course, the cost of our education in the United States as well.
Yeah.
And also just how many paths also there is to midwifery. You have CPMs, you have CMs, and you have CNMs. And each state also has its own requirements in terms of how you become a midwife. And the scope of practice is also different in terms of whether or not you have supervision or not have supervision in different states.
Yeah, absolutely. So what have your personal hurdles been as far as you sort of coming into this journey? And then also PR had added what highlights, what have been the things that have been really challenging for you, and what have been the things that, your yays at the end of the day?
So I think that I've talked to many male midwives or midwives that identify as male or their sex is male. And I don't think most males actually come into the profession thinking at 16 that you would be interested in birth work. That is, I have to say, not our societal predisposition for men in the United States. And I've worked overseas as well. And it seems to be across the board, men do not get into women's work or birth work generally. But I think the interesting thing about midwives who are men and who decide to come into this profession, they all have stories. Their stories are there are multiple reasons why we joined the profession, and a lot of influences by a lot of great women also, or those who identify as women, or those who have uteruses, who kind of introduce us to the profession. In my case, my family has a lot of matriarchs. So in my family, a lot of so people don't know I'm Asian American. So in my family, women are very much into the whole birthing, raising children sort of side. And the men generally don't get involved in that side of the work of raising children or taking care of children. Traditionally, that obviously changes with time and as we progress as a society. But I had a lot of influences in that space, and also a lot of influences in my personal life as well.
Mm-hmm. How has your family reacted to you being, going into birth work, out of finance into birth work?
So my father was initially quite resistant. So I used to work for a large financial company on Wall Street. So the transition was jarring, I guess, to say the least, to my family, especially to my father. The question in his mind is more about job security. Like, okay, you gave up your health insurance, your title, your retirement plan, your 401k, and then now you want to go into something that is completely different. Because my degree was also not in biology or chemistry or psychology or anything to do with the sciences. So I had to go back and take all those classes again before I would be even eligible to apply to a certified nurse midwifery program.
Do you have other, well, that's interesting because I too was in finance before I became a midwife, and some of the same reactions, although, as a woman, it was more accepted that I would want to do this.
I think that there's many people who are in midwifery who didn't start in midwifery. And I think specifically actually in the program that you're in and the same program that PR had done, it sort of facilitates that, right? So you're able to sort of start the journey from the very beginning.
Yes.
So whereas the program I did, which was Frontier, you had to sort of already be a nurse and you had to sort of have some birth background and things like that before you could start the midwifery program. So I don't know. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I had done some work in women's health, but it was on the GYN side and supporting women in abortion clinics and that kind of thing. But my degree was in Latin American history. So that doesn't have anything to do with any of that. So I, too, had to go back and do sciences before I could. And folks were like, you have a family, you have a husband. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yes.
Do you remember what your turning point was? Like, was there like one day you were just like, I don't know, banging away at the keyboard and you were just like, what am I doing? Or...
So there was kind of divergent paths. So I was working in Hong Kong for a very long time. I spent 9 years of my own banking or finance background in Hong Kong working there. And then I decided to leave and resign from the company. And then I took a year off to kind of think about what it is I want to do and travel and see all the people that I couldn't see while I was still working in finance. PR probably knows that it's long hours, BlackBerry, and you really don't get much of a personal life, especially as you rise through the ranks a little bit. And when I came back, I was originally going to be a yoga teacher, and I did become one. I did get certified, and then I added pre and postnatal yoga teaching to my certifications.
Nice.
And then it's actually through that group of women and men, some men, and that kind of led me to birth work in general.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
nice.
that's fascinating. This is an exciting conversation for me because I'm learning so much more about you and just about you, the different scenarios. We have so many diverse scenarios as to what brought us into the business and that kind of thing. Are you friends with other male midwives?
Yes, actually I am. The PR, and I think you both know that the population of midwives who are men or who identify as men is very small, at least within the American College of Nurse Midwives, which is our professional body. Right. I think at the moment there are about 90 that are listed as active members inside the roster at the moment, I think. And I think even a couple years ago when I was looking at the statistics, it was actually still higher. It was over 100. So I think the number of midwives who identify as men are actually is actually shrinking, actually.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. What do you think is the biggest misconception about male midwives? Or in your personal experience? Because we always emphasize that we're not speaking for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking for the Black and Latinx population. She's not speaking for all the queer population. So, just in your experience, what's been the biggest misconception about you and your practice? Well,
the first thing is that they always think I'm the doctor, right? So that's always been the thing that happens whenever I walk into a birth room, or even when I was doing my first year as a nurse. It was mainly as I could have a 30-year professional preceptor that's been working for 30 years, and I still remember one incident where they said, what time do you think you're going to schedule my surgery? When I walked in with my preceptor, that one time during my first year, and I was saying, no, this is my preceptor. You should be speaking to her. And also in the birthing room as well. They've also generally identified me as the doctor and outpatient as well. They've actually said, "Hi, doc, how are you? Thank you, doc, for my injection," or something like that. And generally the misconception is I am a doctor, not a nurse, not a nurse midwife.
It's kind of interesting because my experience is very different, and this is kind of what we address, the intersections in this podcast. I went into a patient's room and she said, my empty trays, I'm done with my eating. You can just clear that out now. And I said to her, I'm from your OB practice and I came to examine you and set you up for discharge. And she just said, "Ooh, sorry." And then I will say that this woman she was a Black woman, which, is interesting. And her husband was white. And he came in the room and he said, "So, doc, how's she doing?" Right away. And I just thought, what is happening here? Yeah. I don't understand what's happening here.
I get a lot from my patients, especially now that I'm focused more on the comprehensive gynecology side versus the obstetric side. I get a lot, "How old are you? How long have you been doing this? Are you really okay to do X, Y, and Z?" Especially as I dive a little bit further into menopausal care, into, doing things like pessaries and things that we typically think of as, an older gynecologic issue.
Right.
Those patients tend to be really hesitant with me. And I think also probably my appearance, because I always have colored hair and I have visible tattoos and funky accessories and whatever. I think people tend to sort of like age me out that way.
Yeah. Ageism, it's a thing. Pretty soon it's going to be for me. Haven't you, you want to go get someone who can hear me?
Ma'am, do you need a wheelchair?
Do you need a hearing aid? It's fine. I'm good. I'm happy. I get the job done.
Oh,
yes,
gosh.
I've actually never been told that I look too young to practice. And actually, some of my fellow students have actually had that issue. Like some older women or people with uteruses are the ones that actually said, I don't really want to be speaking to you about my sexual history, or I don't really want to talk about contraception with you. Because in my program, and I think maybe PR would remember, maybe, I don't know if it's still the same thing with when you were in the program, that there was a very huge age range in terms of the midwifery students.
Yes, it was.
And I fall in the much older category, and there are much younger individuals in our program as well. So they've had stories that said that some of their patients won't see them because you're the same age as my grandchild. I really can't be discussing my sex life with you.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. You do what you have to do to get your patient, very quickly we learn to get your patient comfortable with you.
We've talked about this a little bit about how we have to sometimes vouch for each other. And so, PR has talked before about being, Black and having her friend who was a nurse on labor and birth who's white have to kind of like get her in with the patient in that way. Yeah. And I sometimes find I have to do the same thing as well, especially now that I'm doing some per diem call because I'm not the familiar midwife.
Right.
So this actually just happened a couple weekends ago where, one of my friends was the labor and birth nurse in the room, and she had to sort of like earn my place in the room with the patient. Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, my friend, she was like, "We're friends. We traveled together." We both had met the patient apart, and the patient was very lukewarm to me. And then I went out and she said, "Aren't they delightful?" And I was thinking, And so we went back in the room together, and she caught on quickly. She was like, "Oh, we travel, and my son was in her daughter's quince," and she went on about a bunch of different things, and then we were all one big happy family. So you do, what without coming outside of yourself, of course. You do what you have to do to get comfortable with the situation. And it's not to say that I get, those kind of responses from white people or all Black people, or I get it from everybody. I get it from women or people with uteruses who say, "I would rather see a man." Like, are you gay, by the way? No, but I don't understand. I'm really competent. I'll take good care of you. And then I get the Spanish speaking who will say, "I want someone who speaks Spanish." And then I tell them, "I'm the only Spanish speaking person here. So do you want to see me, or do you want to go somewhere else?" Like, not in that kind of rude tone, but so it's this work we do is about meeting people where they are.
Do you find that partners are averse to you being in the room? Like, as a male ever?
Well, surprisingly, no. Actually, they actually are very excited to actually have another dude actually to be in the room with them.
You got the
Actually,
dude cred.
yeah, the dude cred, in the sense that they actually are a lot of partners, and even as a doula and now as a student nurse midwife, they're actually very excited to have someone to speak to. That someone that can maybe understand or more easily relate to what they're going through, especially first-time fathers. A lot of them are very nervous. A lot of them say, I don't know what to do with my hands. What do I say? If we're going to go into C-section, like what do I wait here? Do I not wait here? How long is it going to take? How do I wear the bunny suit? The bunny suit that you have to wear into the OR. And also just helping them put on the booties. Like they don't really know how the booties go or the bouffant.
And so helping them get prepared, and they appreciate your presence, it sounds like.
Yeah, and the labor support as well.
So if someone was to be averse, I mean, it sounds like you've had a really nice sort of welcome reception with your patient population, but like tell us, because I'm curious about people putting up, some barriers to that, like about people kind of wanting to not maybe have you in their care.
So that's happened as well. And to preface it, I am actually very fine with patients who decided they do not want me in the room or don't want to have me be part of their care team. And I would say that as a student nurse midwife, that's happened about a third of the time when I'm in outpatient or even in IP, where they would say, I would prefer that I have a female provider, or that I don't really want a student to be checking my cervix when I'm when you're in the IP, in the intrapartum space. And that's also fine. There could be multiple reasons why. And this is something that I learned as a doula, that, it's their choice, their body. And if they don't want me there, I do not take it personally. There will always be some other person who might be interested in the labor support that I can provide or anything like that. And there could be a lot of trauma. A lot of individuals have a lot of trauma and a lot of history that they might not even mention to me as a provider or future provider or as a nurse. And I have to be cognizant of that as well. So there's a balance for me whenever I go into a room. I understand the privilege of being a male coming into a birthing space, but I also identify with a lot of other groups or marginalized minority groups or communities as well. So that's an interesting intersection for me as both as a nurse, as a provider, as a future provider, and as a male as well, actually, inside the birthing space.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're going to talk about what unique aspect you bring to the role, and the conversation
crushing
is flowing.
Totally crushing it.
Absolutely. Kate, I wonder if you could share a little bit, or do you even feel this about sexism impacting you on your journey, or Alvin on your journey? And I just spoke to it me when people are asking me if I'm lesbian. If I were, it'd be okay. I'd still take good care of you.
So when I first became, because I've talked to this too, but because I'm a white, straight presenting, queer person, for a long time, I sort of wrestled with if it even had a place, like if my own sexual identity had a place in my care. And so I think in the beginning of my career, I didn't speak to it a lot because I didn't feel like it impacted anything. And also I was sort of fighting against this ageism and all these other things that were sort of on my plate. But what I found was, for me personally, it's super important for me to share if I think it's applicable. So I have a lot of patients who, I'm opening up with, share with me your pronouns. Are you interested in sexual partners at all? If you are they male? Are they female? Are they other? Like, are you monogamous? Are you not? All these kind of conversations that let them know that it's okay to share. And I do think that then there's sort of a place for me sometimes. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes people are very comfortable in their situation and they don't want to talk about it. But I find that many people immediately, especially lesbians, like pick up on my vibes because like that's kind of how it is. And so they'll just be like, oh, okay, yeah, like I can totally tell you definitely are interested in roller derby. And I'm like, yes, like that's like, it's just like that kind of stuff just, is there. So I think it does sometimes have a place, but I often think about as far as when I think of male providers and when I think of also like maybe queer providers taking care of, people of their, preferred sexual population, how do you separate those things? But for me, it's so different. Like I always joke that I could eat a sandwich while I was like delivering a baby because it's just something that you do. And even though there's a lot of emotion in it, there's also just kind of like it's a separation. Yeah, it's a separation. So for me, I don't think it's really negatively impacted. And if anything, I think it's positively impacted my care in many ways. But I don't know. What do you think?
So for myself, I also rely a lot on nonverbal communication. So I do wear my pronouns on my badge, and I also carry the rainbow flag on my badge. A lot of different things, just so that they don't never have to ask. They just have to look, and then they can decide whether or not they want to share their own pronouns or if they want to choose to share their sexual orientation or the type of partners that they have. It actually helps. I've actually had a couple of times inside during outpatient care that when I walked in with my badge, they were initially very hesitant to have a male be their provider or actually take their initial history. And they took a glance at my badge and said, oh, wait a second, this is actually a safe space. And that actually is, and they became much more comfortable. And then they said, oh, and then at the end of the visit, they would talk to my priest and say, I loved having him. He's great. Can I see him next time? And it was very wonderful. I'm glad that I could change some hearts and minds as well during the course of my profession or during my work day as well, which is wonderful.
I think that probably, a year and a half ago, this might not even have been a question, but now we're finding that the Asian population is being subjected to a lot of bias and a lot of unhuman behavior, inhuman behavior, whatever that English word is. And so can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So for myself, I have two minds about that as well. So Asian American violence against Asian Americans or racism against Asian Americans is not a new thing, right? I know that in the last year, it's gotten a lot more attention just because of the pandemic. But culturally, and I don't speak for all Asian Americans because I also like to remind everyone that the Asian diaspora is very broad, right? When we talk about the model minority or the invisible minority, a lot of people do speak about, the 80s and 90s immigration wave that brought a lot of East Asians to the United States. But that is not the only immigration population that came to the United States. There's the Laos, the Cambodian, Southeast Asians, and a whole bunch of different minority groups from the Asian diaspora that has joined us in the United States who might not have been as successful in acclimating or assimilating into the society. And of course, I think in some of your old podcasts, you spoke about, the internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II, whether it was the Asian Exclusion Act of 1882, the Geary Act of 1892, and of course the Great Railway that was built by a lot of the Asian Americans.
That's what we talked about too, that people aren't getting. That was in the episode where we talked about enslaved people were not getting any credit for building the White House, and Asians were not getting any credit for building the rail system in this country. Yeah.
So I would say that overall, it's interesting as in this particular time to be Asian American because also culturally speaking, we don't normally speak up very much. That's a more of a cultural Confucianism sort of thing. Like we like to we like to be more reserved in general. And we also see this in the birthing room as well. A lot of Asians would generally birth very quietly and everyone's always asking them what is wrong. Like nothing's wrong. They're just birthing quietly, which is how they were taught in their culture as well. So there was a lot of interesting cultural aspects to that, but I digress. But
that's great. We're going to come back to that actually, because I'm very interested in that. But no, keep.
But in terms of so therefore Asian American violence I think is much higher than I think that it would be because we don't report it as a culture or as a race in general. So I think it's always happened, but it's just gotten a little bit more focused in the last year. And my own personal opinion is that all minority groups or all marginalized groups kind of have to kind of band together and rise together and not just like single out one group versus another, because I've also been told that I am not a person of color. So there has been a lot of discussion about that definition. What defines you as a BIPOC or a person of color? So if I'm not a person of color, then what am I then in this current society, right? And how should I identify? And then if you say that we're separate from you, then do you still want us to support you? Are there going to be Instagram posts about us? Is there going to still be Facebook posts about us? And generally, you will see more of that in the cities that have larger Asian populations, right? Here in New Haven, we don't have such a large population of Asian Americans or people who identify Asians. So there's been a lot of stuff happening in Los Angeles and Seattle, San Francisco, New York, but not as much in other parts of the country where there's less of an Asian diaspora in their population.
And you're right about the fact that the incidence against Asians and Asian Americans is not a new thing. Just like kind of, the George Floyd was not the beginning of people, of Black people being lynched. And so I think that's a really important point for our listeners to hear, that this stuff has been going on from way back. And so now that it's sort of coming to the fore, it's a great opportunity. And I've seen some posts recently on the BLM, movement that are like, we are including our Asian, brothers and sisters because it's the same. It's just a different person.
I wonder if the Asian population in New Haven, I know New Haven has one of the biggest gaps as far as like socioeconomic disparities in literally the country.
Yes.
And so I wonder if part of that is, I wonder if a larger population of Asian people in New Haven are like academics or in, medicine and things where maybe that class change as well has something to do with that. I hadn't even really thought about that there hasn't been a big, sort of like movement for the Asian population in New Haven. I guess there really hasn't. There hasn't been, right? It's very interesting.
Well, it also depends on if they identify as Asian American too, right? Because a lot of they're academics, right? They're coming in from other countries to research, and we have the Yale-China relationship. I think the Yale-China at this business school, as well as inside the I don't remember what it's called. It's the Yale-China
Is it on the undergraduate side? I don't remember.
I don't remember. There's the Yale China Center or something like that.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, why don't we take a quick break? Okay. And then we'll be right back with more with Alvin.
Yeah. Thank you. This wonderful conversation we're having. Thank you.
Greetings, and this is Wine Time with Grown-Ass Woman, an intergenerational conversation with Ife Michelle. I'm Sexy.
And Sharon Leanne. You make me want to add a name. Make sure you hit us up. We want to hear from you. Again, our email is
gawomenspeak@gmail.com.
Nurturing life.
Okay, and we are back with the Midwife Crisis podcast. We are here with our guest, Alvin. So thank you so much, Alvin. We've been having great conversation. And we actually had just sort of delved into, we were talking a little bit about racism. And we always talk about it sort of in the aspect of women's care, but also maybe sort of stereotypes and cultural differences in birth. And so I was interested, Alvin, if you could sort of speak to that a little bit, because you had just mentioned a little bit about, your sort of thoughts on Asian women birthing and what that looks like. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So again, even with amongst I'm Asian American, but identify as Chinese. So even within China, there are a couple of thousand dialects, and there's 4 major languages and one official language is Mandarin. But we have 4 regional dialects, and then each village will have its own village dialect as well. So generally, when you go to China and you visit, most people can speak at least 2 to 3 dialects in general, just to be able to communicate. But the language is you can't understand each other. The written language is the same, but the spoken language is different. So we each have our regional differences in terms of birth and our cultural traditions. We have a lot of traditions that are very similar, but how they look when you go into each region or each village is also very different as well. So in some places, I would, as an example, watermelon is not eaten during the intrapartum period. Like it's considered a cold food. And Asians consider the yin and yang in terms of our balance when we are pregnant. And generally we like warm foods, you know, to help nourish, you know, the baby and the mom and the blood and all the kind of stuff that kind of helps with pregnancy. So watermelon is contraindicated, I guess, to use a term from our medical term, in the sense that it's too cooling. It doesn't allow the baby or the fetus to thrive, and that is the thought behind why we don't have cooling foods when we're trying to gestate, right? We're trying to help the baby grow to gain like fire, you know, energy, you know, to kind of quicken, I guess you can say in some ways as well.
And then, quickening, for people who don't know, is
just so that it's when the baby starts to move more and you feel more movement with the fetus. But in other parts of China, you have individuals who do sitting in periods. So we would say after the birth, you do not bathe, you do not touch water, and you sit for 30 days, and your entire extended family comes and takes care of you. Generations. So the matriarchs in my family, and because I spent 9 years in Hong Kong, I have a very large extended family there. I got to see a lot of my cousins be born. So I was lucky enough to be able to be involved in the care. They would obviously shoo me away a lot of the time because I'm still a guy. But I get to see, you know, my aunt, you know, our grandparents would come and help bathe and take care, and soups were cooked. Food was cooked, you know. We have our own little version of the donut, you know, that you sit on. We do little rice bean bags, where instead of swaddling, we put that on the baby to give it a little bit of weight. So
I love that, like a little baby weighted blanket.
Yeah, it's like a little square with little bit of rice in it, and you just basically have it on the baby while they're sleeping, and the extra weight kind of soothes them, just like when you swaddle and you kind of get the baby in tight. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is so interesting and also beautiful.
It is beautiful.
We have so many people here who desperately need that. We talk about it a little bit on our doula episode. And we did also do a little bit where we talked about postpartum care, or sort of lack thereof, on a microsode. And gosh, I mean, I think that sounds so beautiful and wonderful. I mean, because it's the fourth trimester, you know, we always say that. It's like your work's not done. Yeah.
Right. And I learned not a lot of it, because you are enlightening me with every moment, but some of this, as you know, as a practitioner going along, you kind of, each person teaches you something.
Yes.
And so then the nurse would race in with the ice pack after, and the patient was like, no, I don't want that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I said to her, no, it's the hot cold. You can't. And they were like, what?
Or,
what do you know? How do you know that? And I'm like,
yeah.
other patients told me, and they don't want that ice drink. Like
exactly.
bringing in
Yeah.
that little cocktail of ginger ale and cranberry over ice. And they're like, no, I don't want that either.
I want warm water.
And then in the meanwhile, this was back when pre-pandemic, when people could bring their families, then their little mom or grandma would be in the corner with like a container of soup that they had brought in from home. She's going to eat this. This is good for her. And so it was really fascinating. I had no objection to any of it. Clearly, if it's been working for all the people where you come from, and it's good. And I think that, you know, in this culture, this American, so to speak, culture, there's a hard time sometimes with other ways. And so some of that that we're talking about with drinking cold drinks and ice on the bottom and stuff, some of it is not based on science. It's just based on what, you know, the culture thinks would be a good idea. And so I always try to inquire about that and find out what people would prefer, and just give them what they prefer.
Yeah.
Unless they're saying, I'm going to do something outrageous, and then that's going to harm everybody. So don't do that. But short of that, I think that like I said, we need to meet people where they are.
Yes.
And respect where they're coming from and what they, and you know, it's really interesting especially on the labor floor. There is, you know, we have our patients who come in who are either Asian or Asian American, and they are very quiet. And I remember being like a novice midwife and having the nurse say to me, just watch her eyebrows. And I was like, really? And she's like, she's not going to say anything. She's just going to be quiet. And I'm just saying, you're like a superhero. You don't have any medications. You don't have any, like, I'm so proud of you. And she said, just watch her eyebrows, because when you check her again, she's going to be far advanced. And so that was something that I came to start looking at, like, look for other signs. Yes. Just maybe just a little bead of sweat or something, maybe not even that, but just watch for other signs, other changes in behavior, because she's not going to present like a cisgender white woman from the U.S.
Well, and that's so much of birthing too, and being in the birth space, right? So I think when we look at it from a medical perspective, we check cervixes and we look at the clock and we see what the curve and the blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But, when you go into the home birth space or the birth center space, some people have no exams at all.
Yes.
They go from they come in and say, I'm having a baby, and then they have a baby, and they never have a single hand in their vagina. And so, we know that it's very possible and successful to look at nonverbal cues and non-physical cues and allow people to do what needs to be done. Now, of course, we always speak to this as well. Not every single birth and not every, baby and not every situation is going to be totally, quote unquote, normal or, what's expected. And so sometimes interventions, of course, are needed. But I just was thinking about how I remember hearing about this sort of color change that happens on the lower back as women get closer to pushing. And it's something that a lot of people do, like when women are laboring in a tub, because they don't want to get in there and have to, check them. They can just kind of allow them. But anyone who's had a baby, Piyar and I talk about this all the time, you can't, once that baby's coming, doesn't matter what your cervix is, that baby's coming.
Right,
so.
Exactly.
Yes. But so I would like to say then that food is a very big touchstone with a lot of cultures. So this is not just something that is Asian or Asian focused, but food is a touchstone and is the center of a lot of family life, right? And and sitting in period is very common across all cultures, not just the Asian diaspora, right? So there's a lot of things that we as midwives can touch upon, right? And say, okay, my culture, we sit for 30 days too. This is very common for us too. And then you can build that connection, which then leads to trust, which then leads to hopefully a really lovely vaginal, good physiological birth. And a lot of that has to do with starting there, right? Where with the connection first, which builds the trust, and they feed on each other, right? And sometimes it's just that. And also a gut feeling that, that you have this, connection with this patient along with some energy exchange. And I'm going very esoteric now, but all of that stuff kind of combines into giving, your patient, a good birthing experience in my limited experience.
No, you sound like you're vastly experienced, because you're putting it all together to create a picture of what you would like to see for your clients and what the experience you want them to have. And like I'm always saying to, I say it a lot to the nurses too. She's not a seahorse. She's not going to have 1,000 babies. We have to make sure that this experience, well, of course, she's not male. So let's start with that. Yeah. But we have to make sure that this experience is as best as we can, something that's positive for her. No, it's not going to be, a human is coming out of your hinterlands. So it's not going to be a day at the beach, but let's make it an experience that she will look back on and say, that was really fond. That wasn't some crazy ride that I wanted to just be dead on.
I do have to say, even though this is sort of a side note, you can tell just by speaking with you that you were called to do this work. And I think we talk to many of our listeners that are wondering about transitioning into this work. And we talk to this a lot. This is not a job that you go into to make tons of money and get lots of sleep. It's just not. No. So listening to you speak is so, it's just like my heart is growing, because you can just tell that you are called to do this. And I think that's the most important piece.
I agree. It's like all the stars lined up with your doula and your yoga and your finance and your family, and it just all came together. And then here you are. Yeah. Will you be finished soon?
So I'm just waiting to go to integration. So for those who are not in midwifery, integration is the time where we have I guess a mini internship or a fellowship. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, kind of like a mini residency.
Yeah, mini residency in which we work full time under a more senior midwife, working as a student nurse midwife, but still like doing the charting and the notes, and basically doing everything that a midwife that is licensed do under their purview. And then we gain all that experience during that 3-month period, and then we go out into practice on our own then after that.
Yeah.
Very nice.
We remember.
What aspect of midwifery most excites you? Like what part? And I'm talking full scope, like
Yes.
like menses through, menopause. Like what's the thing that really like gets you?
From adolescent to almost dirt on your eyes.
Okay. So it's changed. It's evolved, right? Like everything, nothing really remains static. And I don't know if this is the case with both of your practices, but it is with mine. So when I first started in working in the birth world, I started as a doula, like I mentioned before, and it was always just obstetrics, always obstetrics. We'll catch those babies, right? And then with time, I actually have now grown more interested in the gynecological aspects of it as well. And actually, it is peri and post-menopause that I would like to focus upon graduation. And I think that if a woman has spent her entire life, being a woman and have menses and also having babies, if she so chooses, or the person with a uterus so chooses to do so, then I don't think that she should have a difficult time during her golden years, I guess, in terms of the hot flashes, in terms of the discomfort, or the, I guess, is it okay to say vaginal dryness or anything else that comes with
you can say all of that.
We have an E for explicit, so you can say whatever you want.
Okay, but of course some people with uteruses do not have any of the side effects of menopause. But of course, if they do, we of course want to be there to make that transition easier. And I've read the Women's Health Initiative 1 and 2 studies, and that was what kind of kickstarted some of that, some of my interest in that particular area. And also, my mom also had a part in that as well. So all of that has come together to kind of have that interest for me in the birthing space as well.
I love that.
I do too, and you're making me swoon because I feel like that is an area that it's not what's the word I want to use? It's just not like
it's underrepresented.
Shiny. It's not shiny and attractive. It's not sexy.
Yeah, it's
for lack of a better word.
Yes.
And so folks they're not that interested per se in it. And we find even graduating that back then, I found that that was one of my weaker areas.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I didn't really get a lot of experience with that. And so it was kind of on the job training. And I still feel like I'm learning things all the time.
And also, so much of what we learn has real life implications and is reflected from our real life. So just as you said, you had sort of been inspired by your family and their birthing, and then your mom and her journey and things like that. I mean, I think that's totally true, because as we change, as we go through different seasons, I think we do find different parts of the job that mean more to us or mean less to us, or that we want to learn more about. But that's really huge, because that's one area that we definitely need more.
Yeah. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that that's what you want to do, because I feel being in that population that we are kind of an afterthought almost.
And it shouldn't be, you know. I think you're the wise women, I guess, us was the midwives would say, right?
Yeah.
We have the maiden, the mother, the wise woman. So I think all three parts deserve our attention.
Yeah, and your intent to practice in that area brings honor to being one of those wise women. And I think in this society, it's a little bit, we're getting better. And I think as long as you can see a trajectory, even if it's slow toward the positive, that's really good. But we still have a lot of work to go about honoring our elders and seeking their wisdom, and then caring for them in a proper way. So, that's really beautiful. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work-life balance?
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely love to hear how you're planning to and how you have so far maintained a work-life balance. That is a huge question we get from prospective midwifery students constantly.
All the time.
All the time. And I don't know, personally, if you have, your own sort of small family crew as well. Piyar and I talk a lot about our own, partners, former partners, children, friends and family, and how this job can really throw those things out of balance. And sometimes you have to reassess. So we'd love to hear how you plan on tackling that, how you're tackling it now. And yeah.
So I actually don't have a family, and I probably don't plan on having one in the future. So I've always told myself that my family would be the patients I take care of, and also my own friends, and also my colleagues will also be part of my family in that sense as well.
As in children, you're saying?
Yeah, children.
Surely you have a family.
Well, I have a family, yes. But so all of that, I think. So also being part of the LGBTQI community, you tend to make your own family in many ways as well. So you generally have a family that sometimes you're not born of, but are part of anyway.
Right.
But so I have the privilege of having both. So I have both of that, both support in both of those areas. So in terms of my work-life balance, I actually like night shift. I know a lot of midwives, as they go into their career, I actually love working at night. It's when babies are born, when it's quiet, when you actually have maybe a little bit more time to kind of sit with the patient and labor with them, and then quietly deliver, like at 4 a.m. or something like that. So in terms of work-life balance, I think that I would probably be more inclined to give someone else a better work-life balance by taking their shift or doing more night shifts for them.
Gosh,
it's a dream.
I know.
And covering for their holidays when they want to be with their families, because not all of us were lucky enough to have our own children or would like to have our own children or have partners. So if I don't have one, then I've thought extensively about, okay, then I'll cover your Christmases or I'll cover your Thanksgivings where you want to be with your family. And in the middle of the year when I need to go fly and see my family, then I would hope that you would cover my shifts as well.
Right.
And that is a huge part of being part of a midwifery team, and even just an OBGYN team, because it's so important to work hard and play hard. So yeah.
For sure. But you can tell also that he was kind of called. I'm a night owl as well, and I never complained about night shifts. And so that works out fine. But I did have, children and had to kind of negotiate that stuff. But it's just really kind and generous of you to say that you love this work and you are willing to, give to others, not just your clients and your patients, but to your colleagues, so that everyone can have a work-life balance. I think that you're like a dream midwife.
I know. What's happening?
I don't know.
Thank you. That's a very big compliment coming from both of you. But honestly, it's just we work as a team, right? It's a collaborative practice, and we talk about this a lot. And it's important that you do that for your colleagues and with your friends. And I did have that burnout before in finance. It's very, very easy to burn out. And I'm more cognizant of that now in this second career.
What does self-care look like for you? Are you still practicing yoga? And what other things do you do for self-care?
So for myself, yoga, yes, and meditation. So I do meditate. I have malas, so we do japa, a mantra. So I do that almost daily. Walks are great. Being able to speak with my own mentors, my own preceptors who kind of support me along the way. I think. From my own perspective, I think I required less support. I guess I don't know if that's the right word for it in terms of my own personal life, just because I've always been very independent. So I've just never really thought about it. But I have friends and I talk to them, and also in time, my fellow students become my colleagues and my peers, and they will then support me when I have a question about certain aspects of the practice, and hopefully with integration that will bring more knowledge and more understanding of what we do, so that I can better kind of balance, so I can speed up my charting a little bit here and maybe take some home, but then not spend too much time at home doing that as well. And I'm sure both of you have had those days as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we actually, I think you have the right the right outlook going into it. And I do encourage you to hold on to that so deeply.
Hold it tightly.
Because you sometimes get caught up in it and you don't really get this time back and you don't want to burn out. You know, we've talked up to this extensively about, you know, when you start noticing when your pager goes off at 2 a.m. and you're like, ugh, you know, I throw it out a window or whatever. You know,
as opposed to, yes, a baby's coming.
Exactly.
Or I can help someone with another problem.
Exactly. That is your note to self to be like, perhaps I need a break.
Yes.
You know, maybe on the next schedule, I need to make sure that I do something, whether it's, you know, taking a day or, you know, whatever, giving back one of those extra shifts that you might have taken, because you can burn out and you don't want to, because in this profession, you really have to be able to emotionally and physically and mentally be there for your patients all the time.
Yes.
So it can be really draining. So maintain that connection. Although I do have to say I'm jealous of your ability to meditate. I'm working on that.
I've been doing it.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like Pavlov's dog with my little bell. Ting, ting.
I know.
And I start my meditation that way. And I have a little altar with Buddha. And
That's wonderful.
You're the coolest. You're the best.
I just incorporate a lot of different things. I mean, I grew up in Christianity, and I incorporate some of that too. Just put it all together and
whatever it looks like.
Allow
for you.
it to give me what I need.
Right.
I think this is like a really great question for Alvin, because he's shared so much wisdom with us. What direction would you like to see our profession take?
Oh.
And I know it's a deep one.
Yeah, it's a deep one. Yeah. I think there are a couple of things. I think that in our profession, I think we need to be paid for the work that we do.
Yay! Amen. That is a good.
Yes.
Amen. That's a good start.
Yes, that's a very good start. And I've spoken to both midwives and student midwives and midwives who are a little bit burnt out, but also I've spoken to some of my own mentors as well in this space, and they said, you know, we work a lot. We have long hours. We care very deeply, like you mentioned before, and sometimes we can't let that patient go. You know, it's like, okay, we need to follow their charts. Like, how are they doing postpartum? Like, are they feeling okay? There was just some trauma in their life, and we just want to make sure that they're okay. And that is not documented. We don't charge for that in terms of that type of work, right? And if we stay a little bit longer for our patients, or we are in the room like that, so 15 minutes, right, generally is how long we get for women's health outpatient visits, right? But if we stay the extra 5, or we call them on our own time, that's time out of your day, right? But do we get paid for that? And I think that that's important in terms of how we should be compensated, and also our contracts in terms of, you know, revenue, relative value units, in terms of like all of that stuff. Like, should we really be, you know, calculating our compensation based upon relative value units or fair market value, when in truth, when we bill, we don't bill for a lot, you know, in terms of our primary care our primary care hours, right? Like our RVUs is 1 or 2 for each of the codes that we use. And for those that might not be aware, we bill according to certain Medicare, Medicaid coding that's kind of fixed, right? And those things, I think, shouldn't be used to determine a midwife's compensation, or if you are going to use them to determine a midwife's compensation, where is your data? Like, what data are you using to determine how much I should be paid, right? And then you should also allocate administrative time for us as well, in terms of as part of our compensation. You know, like our administrative time is a very big part of our time to follow up on lab results, to speak with patients outside of working hours, to be on call. So compensation as that big part needs to change. I think midwifery education is another piece of it as well. I think we need to have more midwifery schools, and also the barriers to entry to those midwifery schools. No, I wouldn't say lessen. I think it's important to have quality providers, you know, that are trained properly. That's very important to keep a certain standard with regard, because what we do is, you know, sometimes it's we don't want to make a mistake. I guess that's really the important aspect of it. But at the same time, though, to navigate the state system, the federal system, the 3 different types of midwives and how we get accredited, the costs to get the accreditation, our DEA license, our MPI license, and to take the tests as well. I think all of those are barriers, as well as, how to get into midwifery school. It took me 2 years and 1 year of applications to be able to apply, but not everyone has the ability to put their life on hold or go part-time.
And a lot of applications cost money.
Yes.
And so you're putting out so much upfront.
Yeah.
And in order to have more representation, so, more people of color, more Black midwives, more Asian midwives, more LGBTQIA plus, midwives, I think all of that is absolutely, it's a huge barrier. And we need to be able to, have more midwives and have them be of all walks of life.
I want to know who didn't want to scoop you up on the first go round, because they need a talking to. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. Well, that's life. Right? There is failure.
Right,
Failure is part of life, right? Like you have to be able to pick yourself by the bootstraps and say, okay, it didn't work out. Okay. Or this school didn't want me, or this is not, it didn't, I failed,
You are where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's how I've always looked at that kind of stuff. And I have to, especially as a person of color, that things happen sometimes because they should happen because I failed. And sometimes things happen because people don't like the way I look. And so I just say to myself, I am where I'm supposed to be, or this is where this put me because I need to be there for whatever reason. Maybe I figure it out. Maybe I don't figure it out. But as long as I just keep moving myself forward, sometimes a little bit back and then some more forward, then I feel like, we're being successful.
Yeah.
My mom always says, if it's not okay, then it's not the end.
Right.
And I think
in the
that's...
end, everything will be okay. And if it's not, then that's how my family, they say that, then it's not over.
Yeah. Have contingency plans, have backup plans. Path to success is different for everyone, and it's not in a straight line, as we've been told many, many times. And just talk, have a discussion. Like you have issues, like there will be issues and problems with colleagues, and you're going to butt heads. And just remember that we all come from a place where we want to do well or do well by our patients. And the ideological divide is very, very wide in this country right now. And I think it's important that we still communicate with one another and not just hold so tightly to our own beliefs that we've lost sight of being able to listen to someone else as well.
Open minds and hearts, I think, are very important to practice.
Absolutely.
And to just be a decent human being.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, Alvin, thank you so much.
This has been
amazing.
Amazing. It has been amazing. But this conversation, I knew that it would be fine just from chatting with you a little bit. I'm glad we finally got to bring it to fruition because the pandemic and we had many delays and so forth. And so I'm glad that we were finally able to have you come and share with us. It has been an enlightening and really warm experience. I'm looking forward to see the places you'll go.
Absolutely. Me too. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you both. It's been a big privilege to be able to speak to both of you.
Oh, thank you. Do you have anything you'd like to add before we wind up?
No, I don't think so. No. I think this was, I think it's fine to leave it here.
Great place to end.
We'll just let the cards fall where they may.
That's awesome. When folks listen to this episode, definitely share with your friends and family and have them tune in as well because it's rich. We'd like to thank Baobab Tree Studios, Kenny Blackwell, our musical composer, Eamon and Claudia, our producers, and Rev Kev, our friends, family, and all of you who make this podcast possible.
Yep. Please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play, or wherever you listen. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Midwife Crisis Podcast. And please email us. We love to get those emails at midwifecrisispodcast@gmail.com.
Until next time, don't judge a book by its cover. After you wash your hands, don't judge a book.
And never stop learning. Bye.
Bye.